Start with climate protection with a quick check of the CO2 balance. The external pressure to act, but also their own motivation to become more climate friendly, is also growing for the self-employed and small companies. But only those who know their own status quo can improve and reduce their emissions. It is all the more important to know your own so-called corporate carbon footprint, CCF, as the first important step on the way to climate neutrality. Knowing your own impact on the climate is becoming increasingly important in view of climate change. More and more self-employed and smaller companies are therefore creating a CO2 balance sheet. The expectations of customers in terms of climate protection are increasing. When buying products and services, more and more people question how sustainable they are, even when it comes to everyday things like buying bread and clothes or going to the hairdresser. Large companies are also attaching increasing importance to climate friendliness when selecting their suppliers and expect. What is a carbon footprint? The Greenhouse Gas Protocol, GHG Protocol, which originates from the World Resources Institute and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, has now become the global standard for company greenhouse gas balances. This means that the majority of all total greenhouse gas balances today are so-called corporate carbon footprints, CCF, which are drawn up according to the GHG Protocol. Scopes 1 to 3, the emission categories of a CO2 balance according to the GHG Protocol. The GHG Protocol divides the CO2 footprint of a company into 3 emission classes, so-called scopes. Scope 1, direct emissions. Direct emissions, Scope 1, include the greenhouse gas emissions from combustion in the company itself. These include, for example, emissions from our own sources, for example, by the fired natural gas in the oven in a bakery. Exhaust fumes from combustion engines and company cars in the fleet are just as much a part of this as coolant leaking from an air conditioning system. Scope 2, indirect emissions. Scope 2 emissions are understood to mean the greenhouse gases that arise from the purchase of energy, for example from the purchase of electricity for lighting and technical equipment in business premises. Scope 3, all indirect emissions in the upstream and downstream value chain. This includes all emissions that are caused by the company but originated in systems or processes of another organization. Typical examples of emissions in the upstream value chain are those that arise in the production of purchased goods or services, such as the production of the milk that a baker buys to bake his goods. This also includes the emissions caused by the daily commute of employees to the workplace or on business trips. In the downstream value chain, for example, emissions that arise when products are shipped. To stay with the baker's example, these could be the emissions that are released when the baked goods are delivered by a subcontractor. Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. When doing carbon accounting in accordance with the GHG Protocol, recording greenhouse gas emissions from the Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions classes is recommended. After all, only a comprehensive view enables the identification of key levers for effective climate protection measures. Get started with climate protection with a quick check of the CO2 balance. From the dental practice to the architect's office to the craft business, creating your own CO2 balance sheet also offers economic opportunities for the self-employed or small companies. Online tools that can be used free of charge that calculate emissions and make industry comparisons can provide an initial overview of your own carbon footprint. Such tools provide an overview of the current status and thus lay a sound basis for the path to more climate protection and economic success. Creating a CO2 balance sheet is therefore a good investment in the future viability of any company. Greenly contact at greenly.earth